You've been told to avoid bread, avoid rice, avoid potatoes, and maybe you've tried. But here's the thing. Millions of people cut carbs completely and still struggle with their blood sugar, still dealing with the crashes, still feel tired after every meal. So what's actually going on? The problem was never the food. It was never the rice on your plate or the bread on your table. The problem is how you've been eating them. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to eat bread, rice, and potatoes without wrecking your blood sugar. Let's talk about bread first, because this is the one food that almost everyone has been told to fear. And honestly, that fear isn't completely without reason, but it's also not the full picture. White bread is made from refined flour. The bran and the germ, the two parts of the wheat grain that carry fiber, nutrients, and everything that slows digestion down, have been stripped away during processing. What's left is essentially pure starch. And as we just talked about, pure starch with nothing to slow it down means fast digestion, fast glucose release, and a fast spike. White bread actually has a glycemic index comparable to pure table sugar. So if you've been eating 2 slices of white toast on an empty stomach every morning and wondering why you're exhausted by 10 a.m., now you know. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all bread behaves the same way in your body, and even white bread can be made significantly less damaging with a few simple changes. The first change is the bread you choose. Sourdough bread. Real, traditionally fermented sourdough has a much lower glycemic index than regular white bread. The fermentation process breaks down some of the starch and produces acids that slow digestion. Your body absorbs it more gradually, which means a gentler rise in blood sugar. Whole grain bread works similarly. Because the fiber is still intact, digestion slows down, glucose is released more steadily, and you avoid that sharp spike. So the next time you're at the store, sourdough or whole grain should be your default, not the ones that just say whole grain on the front of the package in big letters. Flip it over, check the ingredients, and make sure whole grain flour is actually the first ingredient listed. The second change is even simpler. Toast your bread. This sounds almost too easy, but the science behind it is real. When bread is toasted, some of the starch converts into something called resistant starch. Resistant starch doesn't get digested the same way regular starch does. It moves through your digestive system more slowly, feeds your gut bacteria, and causes a significantly smaller blood sugar response. Cooling bread after toasting increases this effect even further. So if you're going to eat bread, toasted is always the better choice. Now let's talk about rice. And this one is personal for a lot of people. Because rice isn't just food for much of the world. It's culture. It's comfort. It's the center of the plate at almost every meal in hundreds of millions of households. So when a doctor or a nutritionist says, cut out the rice, it doesn't just feel like dietary advice. It feels like an attack on everything you grew up eating. And the good news is, you don't have to give it up. You just need to understand what's happening and make a few key adjustments. White rice, especially when it's freshly cooked and served hot, has a very high glycemic index. In some cases, it sits right up there with white bread. And the reason is the same. It's predominantly starch, and when it's hot and freshly cooked, that starch is in its most digestible form. Your body breaks it down rapidly, glucose enters your bloodstream quickly, and you get that familiar spike and crash cycle all over again. This is especially true if you're eating a large portion of rice with very little else on the plate. But here's something that most people have never been told, and this one piece of information alone can completely change your relationship with rice. When you cook rice and then let it cool down in the fridge for several hours or overnight, something remarkable happens inside it. The starch structure changes. It transforms into resistant starch, the same type we talked about with toasted bread. And resistant starch, as we know, is not digested the same way. It bypasses normal digestion, moves through your gut more slowly, and causes a fraction of the blood sugar response that freshly cooked hot rice does. Studies have shown that cooling rice can reduce its glycemic impact by up to 50%. And the best part, when you reheat that cooled rice, the resistant starch largely stays intact. So cook your rice the night before, refrigerate it, and reheat it the next day. That one habit alone is a game changer. The second thing to pay attention to is the type of rice you're choosing. Not all white rice is created equal. Basmati rice, for example, has a naturally lower glycemic index than jasmine rice or standard long-grain white rice. The reason comes down to its starch composition. Basmati has a higher proportion of a type of starch called amylose, which digests more slowly than the amylopectin that dominates in other varieties. So if you have a choice at the store or when you're cooking at home, Basmati is consistently the smarter option for blood sugar management. Brown rice is another step in the right direction because the fiber-rich bran layer is still intact. But even if you prefer white rice, switching to basmati is a meaningful upgrade. Now let's get into potatoes, and this one might be the most misunderstood food of the three. Potatoes have developed a reputation as something unhealthy, something to avoid, something that belongs on the bad carbs list right next to candy and soda. And that reputation is almost entirely the result of how we prepare them, not what they actually are. A plain potato, in its natural form, is actually a remarkably nutritious food. It's high in potassium, vitamin C, vitamin B6, and fiber, especially when you keep the skin on. The problem isn't the potato. The problem is what we do to it before it reaches the plate. And two preparations in particular are responsible for most of the damage: mashed potatoes and fried potatoes. Let's start with mashed potatoes. When you boil a potato until it's completely soft and then mash it, especially when you add butter, cream, and remove the skin, you've essentially pre-digested it for your body. The physical structure of the starch has been completely broken down. There's no fiber left to slow absorption. Your digestive system barely has to do any work at all. Glucose floods your bloodstream almost as fast as if you'd eaten pure sugar. The glycemic index of mashed potatoes is extraordinarily high, in some measurements higher than white bread. And fried potatoes, French fries, chips, anything deep fried, come with all of that fast digesting starch plus a massive load of inflammatory oils, making them one of the worst possible combinations for blood sugar and overall metabolic health. But here's the myth bust that changes everything. Potatoes aren't the enemy. Preparation is everything. The single most powerful thing you can do with potatoes, just like with rice, is cook them and then let them cool. When a cooked potato cools down, its starch undergoes that same transformation we talked about earlier. It converts into resistant starch, which digests slowly, feeds your gut bacteria, and produces a dramatically smaller blood sugar response. This is why a cold potato salad, made with boiled, cooled potatoes, is genuinely one of the most blood sugar-friendly ways to eat this food. The potatoes that seem indulgent in a salad are actually far less damaging to your blood sugar than a freshly made serving of mashed potatoes that might seem lighter. It's completely counterintuitive, but the science is solid. If you're not making potato salad, the next best option is boiled or baked potatoes, served with the skin on. Boiling keeps the starch structure more intact than mashing, and the skin adds a meaningful layer of fiber that slows digestion. Baking works similarly. The key is to avoid anything that involves deep frying and to avoid removing the skin whenever possible. That skin is doing real work for your blood sugar, and most people throw it away without thinking twice.